Joining us again, this is Mitzi E. Sullivan, CPA, PLLC, and our podcast. Today we're talking about the employee retention credit, and this is something that kind of came to be due to COVID-19, and it's something that the government passed to help businesses. And so we've been getting a lot of questions about this topic, and it's kind of interesting because it's changed a lot since it first came out. And so we're going to hop into that in just a moment. But before we do, if you're watching this video, please do look at our comment section, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Also, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter where we send out new tax information and keep you up to date on just the changing environment in the tax world. And lastly, if you're watching this video on YouTube, please do like and subscribe if you're enjoying our content. And now I'm going to let Jessica dive into the employee retention credit.
Yeah, Jessica, you're going to tell us how small businesses can maybe get some money they didn't know that they could qualify for, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So this employee retention credit has been kind of a hot topic over the past few months, past years. So the employee retention credit actually started back when Trump was in office, when, the whole COVID pandemic hit and all that in 2020, along with the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. And at the time, you could only get one or the other. And the PPP was more like, as they say, low-hanging fruit. And so a lot of businesses went after that loan. Well, it was a refundable loan, so a grant, essentially. And the employee retention credit is also basically a glorified grant where if you qualify for a certain quarter, you can get a check in the mail paying you for qualified wages. So just to dig into that a little more, I'm sorry, let me back up. It changed whenever Biden went into office, and he said the PPP and the ERC can both be given to a business. You just have to not use them on the same wages. So he included Q1 and Q2, and then they extended it to Q1 through Q3 of 2021. And now you can do all of 2021 and all of 2020, whereas it just started with 2020, and then they slowly started including 2021 to give people more flexibility, and the eligibility criteria is actually a little more lenient than 2020.
Jessica, I have a quick question. When this first came out, I know that there was not an application. Really, you just had to amend your 941s, and my understanding was that you'd get a credit on your payroll taxes in the future. Do you know if that's changed since it first started, and if they have more of a formal way to apply now, or is it kind of the same method?
How they apply for it is there's a website that you can kind of go through just to see if you do qualify for it, and they will give you a projected number that you're approved for, and you send all the paperwork in, and then it takes a few months to come back around and to actually issue the funds. So the biggest thing that is making this a hot topic now is those vast changes that I was talking about. So for eligibility for both 2020 and 2021, what they're looking for is either a full or partial suspension in your business, or a supply chain disruption if you're in retail, or a revenue decline. If you are looking at that quarter and that is the quarter you used for your PPP funds, you cannot double dip and do both of them. And then the 2021 difference is that now they are only looking for a 20% decline in a 2019 quarter versus 2021 quarter. But it has to be the corresponding quarter, and there has to be a 20% decline. And again, you couldn't use the PPP to offset those same wages.
Wow. And so you can't use quarter to quarter in the same year.
Right. It has to be like quarter 3 2019, quarter 3 2021. Exactly. Okay. So in 2021, you had to have 500 employees or less. 2020, you had to have 100 employees or less. And 2020, you had qualified wages in one quarter. It was capped out at $5,000 per employee for the whole year. So say you had 5 employees and you ended up getting a deduction for $5,000 for each of them. It was $25,000 max for the whole year. And then in 2021, the qualified wages were actually 70% refundable, whereas the other ones were 50% refundable. So you got up to $7,000 per employee for the quarter. And it's not capped, so you can get up to $28,000 per employee for the whole year.
Wow.
So just again, a lot more flexibility was extended. And then for quarter 3 and quarter 4 of 2021, they created something called the recovery startup businesses. That's just businesses that began after February 15th, 2020, and had to have average gross receipts of under $1 million for each taxable year leading up to the quarter for which the credit is determined. So again, it sounds pretty broad, but get with your CPA to look at your specific eligibility.
For the businesses that have come into, created a business that started 2020 or
Yes.
later?
Yes.
So these were not in service at the time of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So which wages would you compare? So if I went into business in May of 2020, what 2 quarters would I prepare?
Okay, so that's a good question
Compare.
because the thing about that act that was passed is you don't actually compare wages. They don't meet any of the other eligibility criteria, which means they don't have to have the suspension. They don't have to have qualifying wages. They just have to qualify to be under the gross receipt threshold of $1 million.
And so what you're saying is, even if your business didn't exist when COVID first started or before COVID started, they've changed it, and you can potentially qualify now?
Yeah. It's called the recovery startup business. So they're just trying to say, these businesses that just started in 2020, so when all this was going on, didn't have a chance to have that comparison. So they're making the rules a little bit different for them.
Okay.
And is this a way to battle people finding it hard to either find or retain employees?
They're just trying to encourage people not to do layoffs. Same
Okay.
with the PPP. It's all incentive to keep your people employed because they didn't want to see a mass layoff across the U.S. So it's just a little bit of incentive to help the businesses through the hard times and to keep those employees.
And do you think this will be extended to 2022?
There's no telling. The election has a lot of sway in
Okay.
this. A lot of things change it when it switched from Trump to Biden, so there's no telling with the upcoming elections and all that which way it'll go. So we'll just keep looking at it and
And so
keep
the
evaluating.
way it's currently structured would be, right now, if I'm a business and I haven't taken PPP and I'd like to do this employee retention credit, I could potentially do that for each quarter of 2021.
Yes,
Is that right?
And each quarter of 2020,
Okay.
technically. So you can only get it once, but each quarter of 2020, you can compare Q1 2020 to Q1 2019, go through each quarter through 2020, then you also go to 2021 and see which quarters you're eligible for
Awesome.
to get those qualified wages. And let me back up. You are eligible for more than 1 quarter. So for instance, in 2020, let's just say you have 1 employee. You can have up to $10,000 of qualified wages for that employee. So 2020, say you qualify for all 4 quarters. It is capped at $10,000, and then you get refunded 50%. So the max you can get for that year for 1 employee is $5,000. And then you can also go into 2021 and do the same thing. But say you have $40,000 of qualified wages, $10,000 per quarter. 70% of that is refundable, so you can get up to $28,000 per employee for the whole year of 2021.
And so that they mail you a check, or they give you a credit on future payroll taxes?
They do actually mail you a check.
Nice.
So a lot of things that is happening, just to be on the alert, there are a lot of scams with this credit, as have been with a lot of the COVID incentives. People will show up at a business's doorstep saying, they show them the website, they walk them through the steps, and they're like, you're approved for $100,000. They take 10% of that because that's their fee, get all their paperwork sent off, and then a few months later it comes back, and the business didn't actually qualify. You've paid $10,000 to get approved, and now you no longer qualify. So if you're going to apply for this credit, make sure you're going through a firm that's going to be there after it comes back and denies you, or you need to figure out what's going on, because there are stipulations, related party, are your kids on the payroll, like stuff like that, that someone who's in it all the time is going to know what's going on, but you also want to be able to go back to them after the fact. So that is the big thing about the employee retention credit. And the things that your CPA is probably going to request are like your 941s, kind of like we talked about with Nick, payroll summary report, and PPP documentation, because the PPP is one of those things that does make you ineligible for a certain quarter.
Yeah, and when you say you can get the employee retention credit in a quarter where you didn't draw PPP funds, would that mean that if I receive my PPP, let's say in April of 2020, it was meant to last for 2.5 months, so that second quarter and maybe even into the third quarter, potentially, I could not apply for the ERC, but then in quarter 4, maybe I could. Is that kind of how that would work?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're subsidizing, if you receive the PPP for those like April, May, June funds, then those would not be considered qualified wages.
Good to know.
So you can have up to $10,000 in qualified wages. So that would just, you would subtract it by whatever the PPP was applied to for that quarter.
Okay. And and you said it's based on wages paid. It's not based on payroll tax.
Yeah, exactly. It is based on wages paid, and that is the refundable portion.
Nice.
Wow.
The thing that you do need to show is, yes, my revenue is decreasing, and you need to have support to back that up when the IRS does come back, if they do come back to look at it, because they did hire a lot of IRS agents, and a lot of that is because a lot of fraud was committed on taking advantage of all these credits. When COVID came out, no one was on the field, no one was double checking anything. It was way too easy to apply for funds, and this can be one of those where it's pretty easy to apply, and you could even maybe get yourself approved, but it doesn't mean that when the IRS comes back to double check you, that they're not going to find, okay, your tax return showed that you actually doubled in revenue. Why did you report this other thing? So you need to be able to back out, like Mitzi said, back up everything you show them and that you apply for.
And to be clear, they've hired almost 80,000 new agents.
Right. I think
so.
that's
It's
right,
not
yeah.
just a handful. They're ready to check, and that's why it's even more important for small businesses and people to use firms just like yours.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you're operating within the guidelines.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Jessica, can you just briefly, 2020, new business, do I still need to show a decline in revenue, or all of my employees automatically qualify?
2020, you show a 50% decline in revenue from 2019, and 2021, you show a 20% decline in revenue from 2019.
But if I'm a new business, I don't have 2019, and I want to file for 2020, what do I need to show?
Right. So for 2020, you actually just need to show a gross receipts under $1 million for each taxable year leading up to the quarter that you're applying for.
So essentially, if you're a business that had gross receipts under the $1 million, and you started your business in 2020, you're going to pretty much be guaranteed to qualify?
With a loss.
With if you have gross receipts under $1 million, you're considered to be a recovery startup business. So as long as you're following all the other regulations specific to your business, again, visit your CPA. But yes, you could qualify for that. And they said, so for those businesses specifically, that criteria means it's just for all the businesses that didn't meet the previous criteria. So they can't meet that if they don't have 2019 to compare it to. So yeah, if you're a business that started after February 15th, 2020, means you weren't in operation, weren't taking money, then you might be eligible for this as well.
Good. Great information. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So I think that about wraps up the employee retention credit. You can leave questions in the comments and reach out to us if you have any questions.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode, and let us know if you have any questions about today's topic. We'll see you next time.